folks. Our next speaker here in room 103 is Adrianna Frick, a self-taught tech enthusiast who started her journey in the open source community back in the late 90s. Wow, that was one of my favorite eras. Now she leads Canonical's efforts in launching performance-based technical certification programs for Ubuntu. In her talk, Using Certification to Prove Home Lab Skills, Adrianna will share with you how you can turn your home lab projects into recognized credentials. She'll guide us on distinguishing valuable certifications from the not-so-great ones and ensuring your self-taught skills get the spotlight they deserve. Let's give a warm welcome to Adrianna Frick.
How's this? There we go. Thank you. Sorry for the AV problems. We were at the park, and I didn't have all my stuff here to be able to do the early check. So thank you for your patience. Yes, certification, home lab skills. Certification and home labs, how do they fit together? Who here has a home lab? Great. If you don't have a home lab, who here has broken stuff on their home computer and had to figure it out? You have a home lab. The problem is just how hard did it hurt when you had to fix it? So a lot of people in the open source community, they have skills that they've gained through non-quote-unquote traditional means, although in open source, that is traditional. In ye olden times, I'm kind of a gray beard, you might not have been able to tell, you can get a degree, right? Comp Sci was still teaching COBOL and Fortran. There were no networking degrees. So you have to kind of figure out how these things work, and then how do you sell yourself, right? Because that's why we're here. We're trying to get jobs. So how do you build a home lab? Piece by piece, right? Component by component. Now, when you're building a home lab, do you just throw a bunch of stuff together and kind of hope it sticks? Sometimes. But sometimes you have an idea of what you're going for. Because I don't know, if you put 40 PCs together with no networking at all, that might not work out for you, right? You have to have a plan. You have to have an idea. So we build an occupational skill set in largely the same way, right? You start out with different components, you start out with a different goal, and you see how it goes to get there. So how do we build an occupational skill set? Component by component. Now, some of you have already heard this, so I apologize for the duplication. But right now, you already have skills. Some of them are very obvious to you, and some of them are not as obvious to you. Now, many of you are probably here to hear about, well, what kinds of certs can I use to choose what kinds of occupations? And that's not exactly what I'm going to do today, because all of you are going to have unique needs and unique skills. So we're going to start out by teaching how do we make professional certifications in the first place. Now, a professional certification is not the same as a certificate. And I'm going to have some text at the end of this to enumerate this. But essentially, a technical certification or a professional certification should be based on an industry standard. It should require that you prove in some way that you meet that industry standard. Now, a certificate shows that you've completed a thing. Maybe you've taken a course and you get a certificate at the end. Professional certification assumes you know what you're doing when you show up, right? Okay. So now a little bit about me, for those of you saying, what does she know about any of this? I have been in tech, and I have not been in tech, and I have been in tech, and I have not been in tech. Some of you may be noticing some time periods. So .com, I left because frankly, it was a lot like it is now. It's not a fun job market right now, right? It's not life affirming. It's not confidence building. So I said, well, I'm getting out of tech and I'm never coming back again. Clearly it worked for me. So I did a bunch of other stuff. I was one of the few instructors at my institution that taught literature, humanities, and Cisco routing. Not a lot of people are doing all of those. And then I decided to go and I opened a small town yoga studio, and I did that for a long time. I was caring for my elderly grandmother at the time, and that was just what my family needed. A lot of you are thinking, wow, what a really, really lucrative financial decision. Yeah. So I came back to tech, right? And then suddenly there's this weird period of time, 2020, that number might ring a bell for folks. I left the tech industry again, and I had to come back. So all of this is just to say it can be done, right? Sometimes you sit and you listen to graybeards tell you how they got their job. And how I got my first job is not how I've gotten my most recent jobs, right? It's much different. It's not, some dude and it's part of the punk rock scene. All of your friends are going off to this gig because that's how you can get money, and as long as you're on the hustle and you stay up all night reading the books and you do all of the practice exercises, you'll get in. It's not like that anymore, but it's still somewhat like that. And I don't want us to lose that fire and that spirit, because open source isn't about, I want to get a six-figure job, right? It would be nice. We'd love that. But mostly, people who are in open source are in it because we can't help it, right? I keep coming back. I keep returning. I can guarantee I was the only yoga studio, but I was probably one of the only yoga studios running a web server, email server, and point-of-sale system out of my garage, right? Doing my own DNS. Not a lot of yoga studios, I think, do their own DNS, right? So these sorts of passion projects we have are going to help move us forward. It's going to help us stay in the market when others flutter away to whatever new opportunities there are, because they aren't in it for heart. And I will tell you, employers do care about heart. Not right now. Right now it's hard, but we do. What we care about more is that you're on target. See what I did there? Little segue. So this image is really, really helpful for understanding occupational skills. Now, I don't do archery, so if anyone in here does archery, my apologies. I'm a dart player, and darts doesn't help us here. But a lot of us, that's kind of how we look for jobs. 20, 18, 15, all over the board. That's not going to be helpful. In archery, we determine what our occupational center is. What are our strengths? Where are we going to be? This is how a lot of us are looking for jobs. I can't hire this, right? I don't know what you are. I don't know what you look like. I just see a smattering of skills which may or may not be related. So when we're making an industry standard, when we're defining job skills, there's a very specific way that professional certification does it. And what I would love to do is pass this on to you, and you may be able to do this to kind of isolate what you want and how to present yourself and how to sell yourself. So what we do is called job skills validation. This is part of another process called job task analysis, JTA. You're going to hear me say JTA. This is the one time I'm defining it. A JTA consists of two components, a job task inventory and a survey. You can do your own job task inventory, and here's how we're going to do it. The problem with job tasks is different companies mean different things when they use a role name, right? So when I have to come up with an industry standard, I have to find the parts that overlap. I have to find the parts that are consistent. So for the exams that we've made most recently, we choose a target occupation. The one we have currently available is kind of an entry-level system administration, baseline skills, but we're also looking at things for cloud engineering, for security, and so forth. So I pick a target occupation, and then I look up as many listings as I can. Sometimes I'm using a bunch of, LinkedIn or different job sites. Sometimes I'm looking at course syllabi. Sometimes I'm cross-referencing all of that. What I want is the most information possible. If 100 people are looking at an object, I want all of their perspectives because it'll give me the most well-rounded perspective of that object, right? So now, you in your head, you're going to have a place that you want to go. You're going to have a target, something that you want to achieve out of your occupation. It can change. If you've learned nothing from my CV, it can change, right? So let's say you decide you want to go into DevOps. What you can do is then don't apply to every single job you see. It's not helping you, it's driving you insane, it's too much. Pick a target, your dream job, 5 to 7 years from now, what do you want to do? And then cross-reference a lot of those skill sets. Some of them are going to be unique to an industry, right? They're going to be, well, we want you to use this specific tool. Tools change. And it's good to learn your tooling, but it's also important to know the fundamentals underlying that tooling, so when the tool changes, you're prepared. Then once you get a sense of what is the core, what we do is we do what's called a survey. Now, in a survey, we try to determine criticality. Now, has anybody ever heard of this idea, criticality? So this is, I think, unique to instructional design as a field, and it's not as well known in tech, but tech is probably the industry most impacted by professional certification. So I'm really trying to get these sort of tricks of the trade better known in our industry. So, how often do you do it? How important is it? It's that simple. There are some other things that I ask, but at the end of the day, those are the two biggest ones. How often do you do it? 1 out of 5. There are different ways to do it. I do it 1 out of 5. And how important is it? If it is not important and you never ever do it, do I ask you test questions about it? If it's extremely important, but you're only going to do it once in your career, am I going to ask you test questions about it? No, go look it up. But if it's 3 or higher on importance and frequency, that's when we start to ask you things about it. There's going to be Q&A at the end, so please make sure you make a note. So as you're determining criticality, it's a little harder when you can't survey 500 tech professionals like I can. You know, membership has its privileges. But you can see, out of 20 jobs, how many of those jobs want a specific tool? Or how many of those jobs just say they want something? Right? I just want you to know CI/CD, and I don't really care how. I just want you to know how to make playbooks, and I don't really care how. I want to know that you know SDLC, but I don't really, care what your specific thing was. So for those of you who are coming from a home lab environment, once you have your target, and once you start looking over all of these different job skills, you start to get a sense of what is universal. What is an industry standard today? What's becoming an industry standard in the future? So that you can be ahead of the game. And now you can start to see, what do I already have? And that's where this becomes interesting for a home lab user. So you sit down and you look at your dream occupation. You say, well, I only have so many years of experience. Well, sometimes years of experience is code in this industry, right? How many times have you seen a job that asks for 15 years of experience in a technology that has existed for 5 years? Right? We're just using years of experience. It's code, and it means, are you advanced? And we use that code because frequently the people making the job listings don't know what advanced looks like. So if instead what you can do is get a sense of that for yourself, well, people with more experience are going to be more familiar with moving projects forward and less doing actual coding. Or people with more experience are going to have to know how to make more sophisticated playbooks or create more sophisticated networks. Once you get a sense of what's the difference between a 1 to 3 year professional at a particular level, a lot of folks, they are not entry level, but unfortunately if they're doing a career change, you may have to look at entry level roles on your way back to mid-level. You can get a sense of the distinction between what do people associate with entry level roles and what do people associate with more advanced level roles. And sometimes you can skip level that way, right? You can jump right over entry level because you can demonstrate, I have these side projects, I have these other things that I've done, and that will help you to better understand how to market yourself for these roles. So far, does that make sense? All right, so now what we have is we have the sense of what's critical, what is the job I'm actually applying for? Now, how do I become the person that meets those requirements? That's the tricky part. So all of these kind of come together. That's kind of the home lab selfhood you are creating right now. Who am I? Which quite frankly is the hardest question of all of this. You have skills that you aren't thinking of as professional skills. Advanced level occupations are frequently less technical. Right? We don't think about that. But being able to demonstrate that you've managed stuff, being able to demonstrate that you can communicate with others, being able to demonstrate that you can get things done when no one else can, that's really what's going to distinguish you from an entry-level, mid-level, and advanced-level occupation. So you begin to make your own job task analysis, and you begin to kind of get a sense of your own skills, what you bring to the table, and how you might present it and pitch it. Now, from here, again, we're talking about the difference between certificate and certification. Now we're going to talk about how do we prove these things that we've learned through certification. It is amazing to me that no one actually knows the difference between these two things. And it is very, very challenging. Now, how many people in here have seen something and you're like, I kind of want to get that, but I don't know if anybody cares? Right? You see MOOCs. Do you know the word MOOC? Oh. Oh, okay. Okay, well, so Coursera is a well-known one. So these are these sorts of mass courses you go through. You may not have a lot of touch points with instructors. Sometimes you do have a lot of touch points with instructors, but they're continuously running, right? You jump in, you jump out, and you get a certification, right? Except it's really a certificate. You get a certificate at the end. Some of them are really, really good courses. Some of them are fantastic, right? Coursera has some that are very, very well known, CS50, for instance, and that does have some cachet in the industry. But a lot of these are just next. Oh, did you really manage to play 5 hours of video at 2 times speed and hit next through 3 pop quizzes? Good for you. It doesn't demonstrate anything. So when we're looking at certification, we really want some things that it shows it's meeting a competency standard. So it's not going to be low stakes quizzes. If I say low stakes, that's going to be pop quizzes. It's things that don't matter. When you see high stakes in school, in a academic environment, that's going to indicate a final exam, right? 50% of your grade is resting on this. That's a high stake. In the professional certification industry, particularly for tech, usually that means it's a lengthy exam and it's proctored. Right now, we've been working with proctoring. I do think proctoring is important. I think right now it's a huge problem in the industry. How many people have had an enjoyable experience with proctoring in a certification? Really? I have had certs, and I will not name them because I have a lot of respect for my colleagues and what they were trying for. I have a certification that took me 25 minutes to get through proctoring and 11 minutes to get my badge. Like, I took the whole exam, completed it, got it scored, and received my badge in email in half the time it took me to get through proctoring. So that's something to be aware of. High stakes it's challenging and it's difficult. So a lot of exams right now are offering home-based exams. Just be aware of that. You're going to have to kind of show your whole room. They want to make sure you're not cheating. They want to make sure there's not somebody standing behind your computer holding up signs telling you what to do. So I don't know, if you've really done it, you have to show your ears. I don't have any headphones. You have to show your wrists. I'm not wearing a watch. It's involved. So just be aware, if you're just taking little pop quiz things, that's not going to count to the employer as much as a high stakes exam. Certification is often by an industry leader and sometimes nonprofits. So for instance, Linux Foundation would be a great example of a nonprofit that does really, really wonderful work in the certification space, right? Now, how does that certification prove that there is a competency standard and that you're meeting it? One of the first things you want to look for is, do they publicize their methodology? Do they tell you how they came to the conclusion that this was a competency standard or that this is an industry standard? So large organizations are generally going to say, well, we have subject matter experts who consult. We have SMEs at multiple phases. So for our implementation of instructional design, we have our JTA, we have our survey, which a number of our industry partners and enterprise partners contribute to. And then we also have panels for all of our certification items. So we want to make sure we didn't have a typo. In our circumstance, we're performance hands-on testing. How many people in here, hopefully this is an easy question, how many people in here use Linux? Thank you. And it's okay if you use FreeBSD, honestly. POSIX, we love everybody. I came from FreeBSD. Think about performance-based testing of Linux. Have you ever argued with someone over the best command to use to solve a problem? Right? It's the name of the game. It's what we do. So we, for instance, we have dozens, in fact, in some cases, hundreds of people go through the exams to make sure that all of our grading scripts have accounted for every possible way you might choose to answer a question. That way, if you go about something using a different command, sometimes you'll see people, they'll just test your .history. Did they use the command I was expecting to see in .history? And that will lead to very, very competent people being excluded. That's not something that we want to do, particularly in an open source Linux space. So looking at how they go through the process, how they engage with SMEs, seeing if they're open to discuss that and talk about that. Also, you'll notice I say industry leaders. So Canonical, some of you may be wondering who's Canonical. Hopefully not. But Canonical is the company behind Ubuntu. So people generally, you can tell I say that all the time, right? Hi, I work for Canonical. Ubuntu. We're doing better. We're doing better. People know us now, but there are still folks that you have to say Ubuntu, and they don't know about all of the other stuff that we do beyond Ubuntu. So I do have to do work with OpenStack, and we have to do work with Kubernetes, and we have to do work with microcloud. And I say have to as though I'm just so suffering. But when we're building performance-based exams, there's a broad range of skill sets that we have to look at. There's a broad range of technologies we have to support. So look for industry leaders who do a lot of their, I was about to say who do a lot of their own technologies, but there's kind of another side of that coin that we'll talk about in a sec. But if you think about people who become kind of household names, right? Those are certifications that generally an enterprise is going to know. If an enterprise is partnered with that industry leader, they're going to be looking for it. There are a lot of people that we're partnered for who are messaging me constantly, asking when the exam that they want is going to be available. So look for folks that have those sorts of industry leads, because the other side of that coin is things that are really certificates being masked as certifications. So when I say industry leaders, that doesn't mean everyone who has a product. Now, part of my function, in addition to skills assessment, is also going to be customer education, right? I want people to know how to kind of exercise best practices and how to do things well. But what will happen with that is you do have a lot of companies that are just kind of pushing you through an academy. Right? How many people have had that experience where you sign up for mildly interesting one-purpose tool academy And they give you the little certificate at the end, and all you had to do was play YouTube videos at twice speed. Sometimes they didn't support that, so you had to figure out how to do it on Inspect Element. No? Just me? Right? Like, come on, faster, faster. Boom, boom, boom. I already know how to do this stuff. I'm done. So for those of you who've already learned it, you don't need to go through the training process again. Looking for things that are valid certifications. Frequently, they're going to be 3 to 4 hours. In our case, what we try to do to make them more accessible is we broke them up into smaller exams, and then when you get them all together, you get the overarching cert. So there are different ways you can go about this, but when you're looking at a program, look at what is their motivation. Okay? Are they trying to convince you to buy stuff? Are they trying to convince you to buy their training program? Or are they just going to help you prove what you know? Because at the end of the day, if you're a home lab user, sometimes you just want to prove what you know. Agreed? Okay. I'm being a little engaging because it's the after lunch slot. I see folks. You can't see. I can see. I appreciate you. I know you're trying. You're fighting. You're trying to be in here with me. I get it. It's hard. The after lunch slot is tough. We've got digestion and blood sugar going on. So just try to stick with it. So these are ways that we can kind of look at the difference between a good certification and something that is trying to make you their product. Right? Nonprofits are generally fairly credible, right? They're going to be fairly helpful. They're going to give you more of a vendor neutral perspective. And that's also a helpful thing, is look at as much vendor neutral as you can get. So in my particular circumstance, we try to keep some stuff early on vendor neutral before really getting into, this is kind of the canonical best practice. This is really where we want you to go with this. But people who are making industry-leading certifications, we want it to be helpful whatever house you wind up in. If you wind up in a Red Hat house, or if you wind up in a SUSE house, or you wind up somewhere else, we want you to show, hey, I still know system administration, I still know different cloud technologies, I still know things that are valid industry-wide, and then you can tell them how wonderful Ubuntu is, right? We want you to go out there and be in a stronger position, whatever position you gain. Let me see how we're doing. Okay. So personally, these are my priorities in certification programs, because I'm not just, what was the hair club for men? I'm not just the president, I'm also a client, right? I get certs too. In fact, a lot of what I have done has been based on certs. I know you're all thinking, but Adri, don't you have a degree? Yes, comparative literature. Nobody cares. It's fun at parties, that's about it. So all of my tech stuff, I have to prove that I've done it. And at this point, I know everybody's saying you have to have a bachelor's, we've got to check this box to let you through the gate, right? And that is true at some companies. It's not true at all companies. At our particular company, we actually ask questions. It's a bit controversial, but we ask about high school. And part of the reason we do that is for people who didn't go through college, and it gives them an opportunity to kind of tell us their story. It allows us to see those sort of meandering pathways that aren't as clear. So I look for performance-based personally. That's not to say multiple choice isn't great. There are some certifications out there that do multiple choice, and they do it in a good way. It's not, the thing about being a person who writes certification exams is everybody has taken that one class where you had to write your own pop quiz, and they think that's the job. That's not the job. The name 3 operating systems that's not helpful. But if I ask you something like, somewhere on this system, there is a file that contains this data. What is the name of that file? And then I ask you to go look for it, and then you pick it from a list. That's an interesting multiple choice question, right? So the quality of the questions is important. And you may be thinking to yourself, well, how am I going to find that out? A lot of times, in our case, because we're performance-based, we don't advertise a ton what the specific question is going to be. But we do have a self-study section where we say, we're going to ask you things from this area, we're going to ask you things from this area, so go practice these tutorials. In other cases, for instance, the multiple choice-based exams, they're books, right? Watch out. The Kindle market for bad certification books is expanding, right? ChatGPT, Upload. So watch the people you're looking for. Try to stick with more reliable, more reputable publishers. But they'll give you a sense of what kind of questions you're looking for. And a lot of times, the biggest thing in our industry is brain dumps, right? It's a very difficult thing when somebody brain dumps your exam. I'm less worried about it because we're performance-based. I don't think you'll be absolutely astonished if you walk into a system administrator exam and you have to add a user. I don't think that's going to stun anybody. Knowing directory permissions, you would know that. But if the explicit multiple choice question gets leaked, sometimes that's an issue. So look around at prep materials. Get a sense of what kinds of questions are they asking. The harder the question, the more it replicates real life examples, the better. Again, how are they made? You know, was there SME involvement? And what's the occupational focus? So if they have a product-based focus, not an occupational focus, that gives you a hint that you are possibly the product. Now, that's not going to always be true, right? AWS, I hesitate to call AWS a product. It's, 7 million products that are ever changing and difficult to keep up with the landscape. So that's going to be, in my mind, an example of an industry leader and something that it's just where we are. But Joe No Name's new database company. You want to be a Joe No Name database expert? Come on down. I have these multiple choice questions. Occupation? Data something. Hold on, let me go check the SEO. What's going to get me the most hits? There are a million of those companies out there. And so just keep your eyes open. Keep an eye out for what is their methodology, what did they try to do, what did they try to accomplish. Is it high stakes versus low stakes? So we will offer this to you free on our website. It'll only take you 5 minutes. You just got to take a really, really quick quiz. It's not going to get you a job. Okay? Anybody can do that. There's proof. We have a quiz in our booth that one of my colleagues came up with. I did not do it. Don't come for me if you didn't pass the little quiz that gets you a hat. You want to watch out for those sorts of hallmarks of people who are just trying to take your money. Now, do they keep up with industry's changes? That's a big one. There is an exam that it was sort of my white whale. When I was a network engineer in the 90s, I wanted to get it. It was the only reputable exam. To this day, it's still a really, really good one. At the time, there were some other vendor exams. One of them we used to call Minesweeper Certified Solitaire Expert. It got a lot better in the years, but the exam that I'm thinking of is a networking exam, and it was not very good at keeping up to date. And when I came back to the industry in 2017, I really, really wanted to take it because they were testing on the same things. I was like, hey, I know frame relay. Nobody's cared that I know frame relay in 15 years. Please give me a piece of paper that says I'm helpful. I'm not. Anybody going to hire me as a frame relay expert? No? Nobody wants to push through that 56K wall? No? So, hey man, I could get you 64 if you're fractionalized. So you want to make sure that they're keeping up with industry changes. You want to make sure that they, frequently you'll see exams that either require you get continuing education or you have to renew every few years. Make sure they're keeping their exams up to date every few years too. Because if it's somebody who, our last exam release was 2002, but you have to pay us every 2 years, that's probably not going to be beneficial to you, right? So make sure that they're updating their exams every few years. Make sure that they're trying to keep up and staying bleeding edge. And then, how has the community and the industry received those exams? So CompTIA is a very, very well-known company. They've historically been nonprofit, although recently some of their exam branding has been sold into private equity. And so that's one of those exams like OSCP that we're kind of waiting to see how that's going to change things and adapt things. But with that said, what do people say about it? Are people excited about it? Do they care about it? Because you want employers to know what that certification means. Now, be advised that you will hear a lot on some sites, Reddit for instance, that only this one certification is good. And that historically was somewhat true, but a lot of recent surveys and studies, again, thank you Linux Foundation, they're really, really great for providing data on the open source job market, have shown that employers really are looking for people with the skills. So if you have a certification that relates to what they're looking for, and it's not the one that maybe they listed in the job listing, they really don't care. It's just their recruiting department has only ever heard of one thing, right? But the hiring manager is going to be more familiar with what your other options are. So sometimes that'll help you kind of get through. So how has the community received them? Do you talk to people and they say, yeah, I kind of felt ripped off. I kind of felt like that wasn't really a great measure of my skill set. Or do they say, you know, that was actually kind of fun and it was challenging and I'm proud of myself for having passed it. I talked to a lot of my friends and they all bombed and I'm kind of, you know, it's a thing to brag about. I met a colleague at the booth who had scored well on the exam we have out. And I hadn't been paying attention to every single person who scores on the exam. And I felt bad because I didn't know his name. It's like, well, you know, I did really, really well on your exam. And a lot of people that I know, you know, have really, really struggled with it because it's an extremely challenging performance-based exam. So talk to your friends, get a sense of, have they taken it? Do they know people who've taken it? Is it reputable? Are people impressed? And then how has the industry received them? If you don't see the name in the job listing, that's okay. That doesn't mean they don't care. See if the target occupations you're looking at and the target companies that you're looking at, see if they have partnerships with some of these leaders. Because if you walk in and they don't have it explicitly listed, but you see they know the branding, they know the company, they care about that, that will help you get through the door. All right, so don't tell Bryna, but I actually finished 2 minutes early, so we're gonna have an extra 2 minutes for Q&A. All right, we're gonna, actually, I wanna start in the back with the person that I didn't wanna forget. Did I ever answer your question? Fantastic, okay, now I'm gonna go up to Mook. Right now is particularly hard. And I just want to tell people, as someone, you saw, I have seen both sides of that pendulum, right? And it's not always hard. They're just mad because in 2020 we ruled the world. If you remember the great, what did we call the pandemic job shift? So we're seeing some aftermath of that. But a lot of businesses that were interviewed and that were participants in the Linux Foundation open source jobs report actually said they're caring less and less about four-year degrees because people come out with the four-year degree and they know nothing practical. If you have home lab skills, then it becomes about how you sell them. Because if you've just got your quiet little home lab at home and there's nothing on that piece of paper about it, They don't know. But you take that home lab skill, you get a cert, you put that under education, then you've got a little step forward in the game, right? You take that home lab, you do a write-up or a tutorial, and you post that somewhere, your blog, your GitHub page, something like that. You develop a portfolio, you put that on your resume. You're hitting those ATS keywords.
But also get an active GitHub account as well.
Yeah, I know.
Very important.
Let's all sigh with resignation. Yes.
Up and coming opportunity for all programmers is going to be revitalize all the tech for the federal government.
There's a lot of places we can go, and a lot of people are going to have different sort of job skills and different things they're looking into. But there are a lot of other questions, so I want to make sure I get to you.
Two questions. So I hear everything you're saying, and yeah, I mean, if I zoom out of open source at the tech job level, now it's bringing to engineering. Post-pandemic, I'm seeing, from what I was tracking, like the whole industry is going through this transformation, transition. Up till last year, from what I was tracking, the tech industry was, laid off, fired over 360,000. By the end of this year, going to next year, it might be in the millions in the tech industry that are being laid off. So in this transition, I think for everybody that's in this industry, again, not only those are in software and the FANG companies and tech industries and startups, but into the engineering also, and it spreads into government as well, as like you said. Two questions in that context. One, regarding skills and certifications, how do you choose those that last the test of time beyond like what's my skill set? It's hard to do an assessment up front. But that's the first question. How do you train on those things that last the test of time that are relevant to the industry? And two, how do you see the training on skills that have to do with AI, LLM, prompt engineering, all this as a enabler for learning and using these technologies to automate, accelerate, my skill sets and whatever it is, programming, engineering. Like, those are the two questions.
Okay, so to repeat that to make sure I understand, number one, how do you choose a cert that will stand the test of time? And two, do I have any sense of certification in the AI industry and where that's going? Okay, so question number one, how do you find something that stands the test of time? I reject the question. Yeah, and that's, I'm being facetious a little bit, but you don't, right? Who here has been in the industry, in and out, for more than 10 years? Okay, how about 20 years? Anybody expect to be standing here today, where you are, doing what you're doing 20 years ago? How many, the fun thing is those of us who are doing Linux, we happen to jump on the right boat, right? This is still relevant today, 20 years later. And personally, when I came back in to the modern world in 2017, having a Linux foundation and having a networking background were hugely helpful because I already knew how to chop things up into pieces. I already knew how to packetize, I already knew how to understand processes, so conceptually grasping microservices was not as challenging for me. But that was dumb luck, frankly, right? I could not have foreseen that. So trying to pick a cert that will be good for 20 years is like trying to pick a program or app or anything today that will be good for 20 years. So what I would say though, I think fundamentals are always good. That's what I'm going to say, is I personally lean less on things that look for tooling. Because you might be an expert in something that just ceased to exist 5-10 years ago. But also, by the way, don't feel bad about that, because there's an open market for COBOL programmers lately, right? You never know. So personally, I'm going to add to that, this relates to the AI a little bit. There's a lot of movement right now in the space. So far, what I've seen has largely been product-driven certifications. So a lot of what you'll see on the back end will be things like, how do you optimize for environment? So cloud providers have some interesting things, but again, it's going to be occupationally focused. So how are you going to leverage tooling? Are you building tooling? What is it you're trying to do with that tooling? I think that's going to be really where you see it. So a suggestion I have for everyone in this room, this is a thing I do, I have subscribed to a number of, you know how it is when you're looking for a job, you're like, I want, okay, Linux system administration, and you just set up a search, and you get spammed all the time with those jobs. I have ones that I've had for years, because I want to see, even if I'm not in that industry anymore, I want to see where it's going. And after 2-3 years, you start noticing that, oh, well, they don't really want these tools anymore. Everybody wants the hotness tools. Okay. And that will help you keep your finger on the pulse. Oh, hopefully that'll help. Somebody in the back real quick. Yeah? Test.
So this isn't a question, but a recommendation for everybody in the room, if that's okay.
Yeah, we haven't really
I
had many
presume
questions
everybody
yet.
in here is looking for work and trying to figure out, what are we trying to do? So there's a fantastic book, series of books by a guy named Martin Yate, who is a HR and recruiter guy and all that kind of stuff. And he has a fantastic system from a book series. They're all called Knock 'em Dead with something or other. Start with the resumes book. It's a data-driven process that you're all going to appreciate. I can't recommend it highly enough. I wish I'd found it earlier in my job hunt process, but he's also got one called The Ultimate Job Search Guide. Martin Yate, Knock 'em Dead. Remember that. Look it up. You'll love it.
Okay, is it a question? Okay. Yeah, I figured it might be a statement. Let's see. We still have some other people to go, and we're running short on time. So.
Okay. The problem is big data, robotics, and automation is everybody's scared, and we have a carnage here. We're thinking inside the box. That's the problem. There is lots of work in our solar system, lots of new things happening, and I know this sounds really far out there. A lot of work in the CubeSat area, a lot of in meteorite type of mining. It sounds like I'm weird, but in a few short years, that's going to be the place to go. I work in collaboration with, JPL and Caltech, and let me tell you, there's going to be some work in those particular areas. You just have to be mindful and start to get into those hackathons and those meetups when it comes to those kind of committees.
And he's going to be next.
So, for students who have home labs and stuff and are like getting into Linux, and do you have any like specific cert recommendations that you have, especially for people who've like done a lot and kind of dabbled in a lot? That's what I'm curious.
It's very much going to depend on your industry, right? So there are certain leaders in the system administration space. There are certain leaders in the cloud space. With cloud, it gets tricky because you sort of have to declare allegiance. That's a tricky thing, right? There are 3 major cloud providers, and jobs frequently will look for expertise in one, and that gets a little difficult. So this is where that target job practice starts coming into play. Look at, decide, okay, in 5 years, I want to be X. By the way, just heads up, if you're just getting out of school, in 5 years, you're probably not going to be X. All sorts of weird things are going to come your way. You're going to go over here and go, oh, that's so much cooler than what I thought I was going to do. Or, oh, I hate doing that every single day. Because when you're doing it for fun at 3 in the morning, it's great. But when you're doing it all the time, it gets old. So, but find a target. Just find a direction so that you can begin to get into that yellow space of, hitting the target. We don't want to be here. We want it to tell a story. We want it to be skills that you can market and say, I can do a job. So I would say, find a target occupation you think you want to go into, so SRE. And then the types of roles that you're looking for have certain skills that are required. And there are certain industry certs that will help you prove those skills from your home lab. Now, there are also, for instance, in the DevOps space, there are some really, really good online trainings. And I don't want to, decry MOOCs because they are useful when you're gathering those skills. But in terms of what certs are helpful, AWS obviously is a big name. CompTIA, it kind of depends which one you're going for. Linux Foundation has great stuff, obviously. We're in development right now, but you're always welcome to check out what we're offering. So I would say you really, really have to kind of fine-tune where on the target are you aiming, and that will help you figure out what certs you want to get. I believe I have like 30 seconds left. Okay, so I finished on time. I don't do that all the time. So thank you all for coming.
All right, everyone, let's give it up for Adrianna Frick. This is the most full this room has been all day.